think we're going to get started, everybody. If you could take a seat, that'd be great. They're very punctual here at KentPresents. You like that, right? I know. Okay. Okay, everybody's seated, basically. My name is Jane Whitney, and I'm very glad that you're all here for this session. We think it's going to be a lively one. Gallup will tell you that the top issues of this campaign are the economy, terrorism, and jobs. But a tsunami of gaffes, emails, tweets, and allegations of improprieties have turned this election into a discussion about the fitness and the integrity of the two historically unpopular candidates who are running for the presidency. So we are delighted to have with us two guests who are uniquely qualified to talk about this. You're going to sort it all out in 50 minutes. We have with us the former House Majority Leader and a man who served in Congress for 13 years. Eric Cantor is now the Vice Chairman and Managing Director of Moelis & Company. Give him a round of applause. Did I get it right? Perfect. Good. Okay, and also second-term Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who represents the 8th District in New York, AKA Brooklyn, right? Okay. All right, the reason I'm standing out here on the floor is we want to get to as many of you as possible with questions and comments. Not that you have any opinions about this, right? And we're going to get to you in a few minutes. But first, I want to start by asking a very simple question. Eric Cantor, what are your thoughts on this race?
We can answer that in about 2 hours. I do think, there's a lot of conventional wisdom because there's been a lot of punditry about this race. Most unusual, I think, in our at least recent memory. I think really you can say three things about the race and what's going on that, to me, worry me because I think it's feeding into a broader thematic that we've got to be concerned about. And I think it's a bipartisan issue, really. So number one, I think there is this real sense of nostalgia going on both sides. If you think of the Trump-Sanders phenomenon, it's very much about trying to restore the prouder days of America when the industrial manufacturing base was thriving, when we didn't have to worry about globalization so much or the influx of immigrants. And I think you heard that with Bernie Sanders, and you certainly hear that with Donald Trump. I think additionally, you've got a lot of grievance going on because there have been a lot of disaffected population. No question about that. And it's really much about someone else's fault. And on the part of Trump, you hear a lot about sort of the illegal immigrants. You hear from the left, you hear a lot about corporate America or Wall Street. From Trump, you could hear it's the Muslims. To Bernie, you can hear it's the capitalists. And then I think, and thirdly, you have a real sense of, I think, authenticity that the voters are demanding. And, that's Trump. I mean, he says what he's thinking, and that's unfortunate a lot of times. But, I think there is, this sense when San Bernardino happened, and the president didn't want to say that it was because of a terrorist cause. And after Paris happened, when the statement was about why our ISIS strategy is working, I think that people sort of see through that. So, Jane, you ask what's going on. I think that, put it in a larger context, globally, we've got this sort of ascendancy of a populism that is ideological in nature, political in nature, and I think we've got a real assault on what we all know as liberalism. Now, I'm saying that in the classic sense, not Republican versus Democrat, conservative versus liberal. I mean the philosophy of individual rights, of free markets, and we've got a serious, serious question I think all of us have to grapple with in this country after this election.
Okay.
No matter who wins.
All right, well, that's what we're going to do today is broaden this out to really what the implications and the significance of this election are in a broader sense and where we go after November 8th. Hakeem, what are your thoughts on this race?
Well, I think I'd look at it through three different lenses as well, a little bit different than Eric, though I understand many of the points that he's made. One, I think there is real meaningful economic anxiety in the country amongst people who are Democrats, Republicans, the left and the right, based on some of the structural changes to the economy that have taken place over the last 40 plus years. If you just look at the fact that in the early 1970s, from that point to where we are today, the productivity of the American worker has increased in excess of 285%. But wages during that same period of time have increased by less than 10%. And so the American worker, for a variety of reasons, has become far more productive, and yet those productivity gains are being realized by very few in society. And though quantitatively there's been tremendous progress, I think, under the last 8 years of the Obama administration from where we were to where we are today, and I don't think that anyone can factually dispute that, there is still meaningful anxiety that unemployment numbers are relatively low, the underemployment numbers are pretty significant, and that has played itself out in the election to some degree in the Democratic primary, but certainly I think we've seen that play itself out in the rise of the Trump candidacy. But I also think there are two other phenomena that can't simply be dismissed in terms of where we are in this presidential election. One, obviously, is that there's a xenophobic component to Trump's candidacy that should be frightening. Those of us who really believe in the notion of a colorblind democracy in this great republic that we have in terms of some of the appeal of his candidacy, whether that's demonization of immigrants, criticism of women, the handicapped, Muslims, you can go down the list. It's been a parade of horribles in terms of who Donald Trump has gone after. And so that certainly is an element. I don't want to overplay it, but it can also, it should be acknowledged, should not be dismissed. And then the third element that I think is interesting to me is that there were some on the other side of the aisle who, it seemed to me, from the moment that President Obama was sworn in, were determined to delegitimize him as a president. And Donald Trump participated in that effort in a very prominent way by questioning his citizenship in 2011 in a way that played to some of the far right. And many of the people that have been drawn to his candidacy, not everyone, but certainly many, have been drawn to that aspect of what Trump even represented before he was a candidate. Now, what's been interesting to me is that while the president has not been delegitimized amongst the majority of the American people, he's got relatively high approval ratings equivalent to Ronald Reagan in his 8th year. Historians, political scientists may take a look and question whether, at least amongst some in Trump's base, particularly during the primary, whether the office of the presidency was delegitimized such that someone who, at least I believe, is so woefully underprepared for the office could emerge as the standard bearer for the party of Lincoln and Reagan.
Okay. Eric, it's been said by the former RNC chair, Michael Steele, it's been said by a lot of people, that the Republicans are reaping what they sowed, that basically Donald Trump is a creation who's been in the making for 40 years. Now, you've gone on the record, and you're not here today, and we want to make it really clear, as any kind of Trump surrogate. You're not defending Donald Trump. You're here as who you are. But you've gone on the record as saying that you're frustrated about what's going on in your party. You are frustrated about what's going on in this country. You've said you don't think that Donald Trump is a good role model for children. So how do you square? I mean, do you support Donald Trump?
So first of all, Jane, stipulate the fact I am a Jeb Bush Republican, right? So I was a co-chair for Jeb. I have been on the record saying I still think he would have been the best nominee and could have won. But again, not what the electorate was asking for. And you know, it's pretty extraordinary to a lot of us that somebody like Donald Trump was successful, number one, in getting the nomination, and number two, now, although the polls have indicated lately over the last week that Hillary is broadening her lead, it's not for sure yet. And I think all of us, and I think if Charlie Cook is here, would tell you the trends certainly look like Hillary ascendancy here, but we're all sort of questioning it now, and that's what's so extraordinary to me. How does this happen? So there's plenty of ways that you could say the Republicans got what they deserve because of the expectations games that have been raised about repealing Obamacare, about repealing Dodd-Frank, about balancing the budget, about all the things that have been talked about the last 8 years and have been unable to be delivered. But, again, I'd like to point to a much larger issue that's going on. Because if you look globally, look at what's going on in Europe. Look at what happened in the UK in June with Brexit. Look at what's happening in Spain with Podemos. Look at what's happening in Greece, in Holland, in France with Marine Le Pen, in Hungary. These are in Poland. These are all, I think, demonstrative of the fact that we've got a rise of an ideology that is assaulting what we know as an order that has worked for so many of us. Now, we've got to deal with that. And we've got to deal with that, I think, in a bipartisan way. Because look at where Hillary has come from and where she is now on the issues. She has flipped on some issues that are very important to that classic sense of liberalism that I was talking about. Free markets and free trade and immigration. And you look at what Donald Trump is talking about, blaming people, saying that it's the Mexicans' fault, it's the Chinese' fault, it's corporate America, Wall Street's fault. That is what Donald Trump is saying. All of a sudden, I think both parties have demonstrated that we are being subjected to a force that we've got to deal with, and it's not just here in the United States.
No, it's not just here in the United States, but you've got a study came out in Politico this week talking about 65% of white voters in this country would support a third party if given a choice, if that party was tough on immigration, promoted traditional Christian values. Now, the demographics are younger, lower socioeconomic, but this is a lot of people talking about going out and starting a third party. So with all due respect, globally, I think is a very important point you're raising. But in this country, Hakeem, you're talking about people who feel disaffected for a reason. They've been left behind. They've been forgotten. They feel their status has changed. And the Democrats haven't done a great job of reaching out to these folks either.
Well, 2 points there. One, I think the diversity of the country is a strength, not a weakness, and one that we should embrace. I represent, Jane, I think, as you know, one of the most diverse districts in the country. It's still a slight majority African-American, but they're African-American, Caribbean Americans, Latinos, South Asians, the Orthodox Jewish community, Bangladeshi Americans, Turkish Americans, Italian Americans. In fact, I represent more Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union than any other member of Congress in the country. I mean, who knew? Hakeem Jeffries. I mean, what a great country. And so the diversity that I see each and every day in the district that I represent, and certainly in Brooklyn and the city of New York and increasingly in the country, is a phenomenal thing. It should be embraced. One of the things that we notice, however, is that countries tend to look inward in the midst of economic anxiety. They look outward and have a more forward-thinking approach when things are going well. And I think both Eric and I have spoken to the issue that there is real economic anxiety that exists around underemployment, around the high cost of a college education. We are trying to do something about it, at least the Democratic caucus, I think, in my view, in the Congress. But in terms of anxiety around a secure retirement, as we've shifted away from sort of a defined benefit plan to defined contributions and the uncertainties around the market, notwithstanding how well it's done over the last few years. So there are real quantifiable reasons why I think there's economic anxiety, and I think both parties have to do a better job of speaking to the issues, but more importantly, when we have a new lineup in Washington in January, doing something about the problems that the middle class and those who aspire to be part of the middle class confront in America.
Okay, let me see. Do we have any questions, comments in the audience at this point? On this side? No, we're going to go over here. Oh, where? Oh, you want to? You can just go ahead.
Hi, Hakeem, Congress. So So I appreciate what you're both saying about real economic anxiety, and I think that's right. And I think to only speak about Trump as a race monger is a mistake, right? Undersells people's real anxiety. But one thing I've been stunned about, as you were pointing out, Hakeem, in not ignoring that, is how unbelievably and previously thought core Republican beliefs have nothing to do with Trump's campaign. His ability to flip on issue after issue. Take just one example, right? Whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, as it's, I think, often misstated. There's just no reason to believe that Trump, other than deciding to run for president, has any deep commitments to abortion rights. This is a single issue block which is thought of as a third rail. It was thought of as impossible. Trump flipped on it in the most cynical and obvious way, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing from those who you thought would have sunk his campaign for it. So I just wonder if you could both speak about how to stop from being cynical and believing that this isn't all just crass anxiety, status seeking, when those who have told you for a generation, this is why I believe what I believe, went completely silent when those beliefs were cast aside with just utter contempt.
Go ahead, Eric.
I can't see your name, but
I'm Echo Yanka. Sorry.
Echo.
Echo Yanka, Cardozo Law School.
Echo, you're sort of making the point I'm trying to make here. We're being subjected to identity-based populism that is taking on the traditional pillars of both parties. Now, Donald Trump, as you say, on a lot of the major issues, it's not just the pro-life, pro-choice issue. It's free trade. It's immigration. Frankly, it's the nature of the tax system and how we conduct ourselves. He has upended all of that as to what has traditionally been the Republican response in a classically liberal society that we are. Similarly, Hillary is being pulled in the opposite direction to the left, and not as willingly, I would say, as Donald Trump goes out there and is. And this is the problem. I mean, all these things that Hakeem and I agree on when it's an issue of low wages, sure. That's been the case for decades now, that the average median income has not gone up. When we talk about immigration, the fact is Mexican immigration trajectory is going like this.
It's right. It's
right?
down.
And when we talk about slow growth, because you hear that a lot from my side, that's the issue here. And I think Hakeem said when you have economic malaise, people are going to be upset, sure. But, you also see in countries like Turkey or the UK, Poland, they've had growth and are experiencing this as well. So what I'm saying is, you're right. This does not make sense. Something is taking hold here. And I think all of us have got to rethink, and I know Hakeem and I, who've been in the wars in Congress, it works when you get a majority, and a majority should be that in the middle. The right and the left working together, setting aside differences, seeing how we can go forward incrementally to ultimately get where we want to go.
When's the last time we saw that?
Exactly. Exactly.
You want to make a comment, and then I'm going to go ahead, Hakeem. Go ahead.
Well, one of the hopes coming out of this election is that you will see a resetting of this notion that that campaigns should be permanent and that there's no breathing room to govern. And that's been a dynamic that I think has been unfortunate over the last several cycles, that particularly when you see divided government and the potential for Senate majorities to flip, or the presidency to go back and forth, or the House majority changing in 2006 and then changing again in 2010, that there's a temptation to engage in the perpetual campaign to delegitimize the other side and not actually govern and deal with the problems of the American people. And that perpetual warfare, I think, in part yields a candidate like Donald Trump, who many view as sort of a strong man who's willing to say it like it is, even if that's offensive to others. He's a complicated phenomenon, and so I certainly don't have the academic qualifications to diagnose him as an individual.
That's wise, Hakeem. Very wise. Go ahead.
Neither do I. Jim Kessler. If you look at the most likely outcome of the November election, it'll be Hillary Clinton as president, probably Democratic control of the Senate, and probably Republican control in the House. What that means is that for the first time since 1888, a Democrat will begin office in the White House without having complete control of Congress. You have to go back to Grover Cleveland, which means anything that gets done will have to be done in a bipartisan way. So my question to each of you, Mr. Jeffries and Mr. Cantor, is, Mr. Jeffries, what do Democrats need to give on to reach agreement? And Mr. Cantor, what do Republicans need to give on to reach agreement and get things done?
Thank you. Thank you. Good question. Yep.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the starting point for dealing with the problems that have risen to the forefront for the American people are going to be this underemployment phenomenon, or the absence of good jobs in the view of many people. How do we accomplish that in an environment if there is still Republican control of the House, where there will be some who will be resistant to the type of significant spending necessary to further stimulate the economy? I think will be complicated, but I do think that there's a pathway to compromise around dealing with our broken infrastructure and transportation across the country, which has fallen further and further behind. And if you invest in transportation and infrastructure in a meaningful way, we'll have to figure out how to fund it, and Democrats may have to compromise in some ways in terms of the mechanisms that are available, and some of it perhaps may be repatriation of funds that are overseas right now that can be brought back to the United States at a much lower tax level. That's one proposal that has some Democratic support and some Republican support, but maybe an area where Democrats have to give on. But if we can find that sweet spot on infrastructure and transportation, then you have an area where you are doing something that's good for business, good for the overall economy. The Chamber of Commerce in Washington completely supports the notion that we need enhanced investment, and you could create actually good-paying American jobs at prevailing wages, particularly amongst many of the communities across the country in the Rust Belt and beyond that have suffered from the adverse consequences of some of the trade deals gone bad, with millions of good-paying manufacturing jobs being shifted overseas. That, to me, could be a starting point for common ground.
Okay. Eric, what do you think? You think that sounds viable?
Yeah, I mean, well, let's set aside viability for a second and say I agree. The route is through the infrastructure proposal, because you hear Hillary talking about, I think, $285 billion worth of new infrastructure programming. Infrastructure on my side of the aisle has always tended to be less of a philosophical issue. It does come down to the spending issue. And I do think if there is a Hillary Clinton presidency, there's about 6 to 9 months that she's got in order to get that done before things blow up again. And
you think she has that long?
The reason why I say that, it's up to her, and what she and the administration would have to give up is giving up on trying to do something quickly on immigration. And my suspicion is what she'll want to do on immigration is to get the court straight, meaning get Merrick nominated, so there is 9 again on the courts, and then ask for a rehearing on the issue of the executive order that Obama had put forward, the president had put forward on the families of the Dreamers. If she can withhold on that, it'll keep everybody from going crazy on my side. And I do think, and Hakeem is exactly right, the only way you get $285 billion paid for, which is going to be insisted upon by my side, because they're not going to go and say, let's just keep spending money. So the only way to get it paid for is through deemed repatriation, which means you have to credit and you have to tax those with profits stranded abroad one time in order to exchange for a lower rate going forward. Now, that's not happening without a larger tax reform, because there's too many political forces at work that will say no to just international tax reform, corporate reform, or unless you do the whole thing. So that's a lot to get done in 9 months. But I do think that's the window of opportunity. So she would have to give up on going for immigration first. My side's going to have to negotiate and give up on the fact that they're going to see more money spent, not just retiring the debt. And they're going to have to give up, and I think it's less important then, on the details of tax reform. Now, interestingly, if we're talking about the economy, I think a lot of us believe the most important thing you can do for the economy to grow it again is to implement corporate tax reform. Now, Hillary has not mentioned those words in the last 6 months for fear, in my opinion, of being blasted by the far left in her party. And so she's going to have to give up on that too and say, you know what, we're going to have to advantage our companies vis-a-vis their competitors abroad if we want to get this economy going on.
I think Eric is right that there's going to have to be some corporate tax reform as part of a broader package, but there will have to be, and I think a President Hillary Clinton will lead on a middle-class tax break as well. She's spoken about that more prominently during the campaign. I did want to add one point, because I think Jim laid out a scenario where the Democrats take the Senate back, and I think there's going to be some responsibility amongst Senate Republicans to behave responsibly. I don't know if the window is 6 to 9 months, but you can't have a Mitch McConnell from the gate make the determination on January 20th of next year that his primary objective is to make Hillary Clinton the one-term president, because that's what he declared against Barack Obama, and it's irresponsible.
Okay, at this point, I want to see how many people have a question or comment, because we're, you know, again, punctual. So we're going to run down as many as we can. I'm going to start with you.
Seems to me that the Trump phenomenon.
Say, what's your name?
Oh, I'm David Baltimore from Caltech, like everybody else. And seems to me that had Donald Trump been a more reasonable candidate, he'd be a viable alternative in this election. He isn't at the moment, at least that's how it looks. That means that if we go into the next election in 4 years, a candidate who was a reasonable person, who was really interested in politics, but had the same general views as Trump, could become a viable candidate. How are we going to avoid that happening?
Okay, what you're talking about, what a lot of people are talking about, does Trumpism survive Trump, theoretically? And is the message bigger than the man? And this is something, again, it goes back to that study where people, the anger, the disaffection, what do you think, Eric? I mean...
Well, and I also have to say it's Trumpism and Sandersism. I mean, it really is. If it were not for the granularity of the Democratic Party's nomination process, you may have a very different nominee in that party today. My party didn't have any adults in the room. They were all beat by Trump, right? So you know, this is a problem that we're dealing with. It's not just, it's that anger, it's that longing for something better. And there is now this sense that we've got to grab a hold of somebody who can fix it all because it's gotten so bad.
Okay, but you make a point also of something you call short-termism, where you talk about how people want it done now. They want it, it's like instant gratification. Right. And that's a part of the problem, too.
That's exactly right, because when you have the lack of confidence in the institutions of government and so many other things in our society that's prevalent today, the elected officials are not willing to take risks to go about investing in and playing for the long term. I mean, anybody here in finance and the capital markets knows we're seeing that trend in a sort of a loosely analogous way right now. You know, with activists, investors, and questioning the ability for boards and management to shepherd capital and invest that capital on behalf of shareholders being questioned every day. So there's this loose analogy going on, but we've got to, I think, redouble up and become more robust in that long-term view in order to engender some confidence again.
Okay, Peter, you want to just...
Hi, Peter May. So during this entire conference, it's almost been taken as a given that Hillary Clinton's going to win, which really frightens me, because there's there can be a sense of complacency within the Democratic Party or within the Republicans who don't like Donald Trump. And that's a separate issue in terms of what happens over the next several months in terms of the election, or the next few months. But nobody's talking about what happens if Donald Trump wins, and what kind of an agenda could we expect, or what you, as members of Congress or a former member of Congress, thinks could happen. And I'd love to hear that.
Hakeem, you want to start?
Well, I think Canada will see a dramatic increase in its population initially. But I think the responsible thing under that scenario, Peter, if the American people elect Donald Trump as president, is to try to set aside the xenophobia, set aside the racist undertones amongst some of his supporters, set aside the irresponsible rhetoric, and try to hone in on the legitimate aspects of what his core supporters have been concerned about, which Eric and I have both spoken to, which is the real meaningful economic anxiety, and try to find common ground in that area where we can try to bring good-paying American jobs back to this country in ways that are responsible. And I think, as we've both talked about, transportation and infrastructure is probably the way to go. Now, there are going to be some challenges, on the left. There'll be some challenges, the hard left. I think there'll be some challenges on the hard right. Ronald Reagan made an interesting observation, I think it was in 1964 when he was campaigning for Barry Goldwater, where he said that government does nothing better than the private sector outside of its legitimate functions. And I think when you unpack that statement, it's a very interesting observation from someone who's widely viewed as a successful conservative president. He said it in 1964. What he was saying is, which I think reasonable people can agree on, that the markets are, when properly regulated, tremendous source of prosperity and economic progress that we've made for generations here in America, but that there are legitimate functions of government. And I think some, the Freedom Caucus, the far right, in the House at least, I can't speak to the Senate necessarily, don't view a government as legitimate at all. And in the absence of, we can have a debate about the proper role of government, where Eric's view is it's more limited, and my view is that at times a greater degree of intervention is appropriate to make sure that the markets are properly functioning and other things take place. But if there's a view amongst some that prevent us from getting to a governing majority, that nothing government does is legitimate, particularly at the federal level, then we're going to be trapped in a problem even under a Trump presidency.
Okay,
So,
Eric,
Pete,
go ahead.
let me speak, just try to be specific on what I believe may happen in a Trump presidency, and assuming if it's a Trump presidency, it's a Republican Senate
Right.
and a Republican House.
Right.
And let's assume that the Republican Senate is tenuous, so there's not a lot. There's not a lot of room, so the Democrats are in a position that the Republicans, that the Democrats are in today. They can block a filibuster. I mean, they can demand a filibuster. So I think that what you will see, I do think Trump will try and do that transportation money, the infrastructure money, again, bringing about the need for tax reform in the same way we discussed before with the Hillary presidency, and there'll need to be that deemed repatriation, bringing about the larger reform. But I also think that you're going to see Republicans wanting to do something to, quote unquote, repeal Obamacare. And you're also going to want to see them do something to want to repeal Dodd-Frank. And these are action-causing events. And this is, I believe, going to consume the debate, especially on health care. And just as note, even if either way, Clinton or Trump, you're going to have something else that is going to arise, something that the Independent Payment Advisory Board recommendations in 2017 are going to come into play and upend, again, the discussion about Medicare and Obamacare because of the cost. So I think we are going to have a big, big national debate on health care, like it or not, in 2017. And if it's Trump, the action-causing event will be the Republicans will have to step up and decide what is their vision, what is the alternative to what we've got now, because it's been very difficult when I was there for 6 years during the administration to try and coalesce around this alternative. So I think that's really what now, you'll see immigration, you'll see attempt at a wall, all that.
Okay.
Hi, Trevor Morrison. Thanks, Hakeem and Eric, for being here this morning. Just quick on a wall. I think if Trump wins, there will be a wall, and Canada will pay for it. I'll be on the other border. But this is really agreement with Eric. That's not my question.
Is that new material here
right.
today?
Eric, I very much agree with you about the overlap, about the similarities between Trumpism and Sandersism. There's a kind of populism there that's very worrying. And it's a populism that encourages and is fueled by a distrust of every institution of civil society. And so if we think of what's most at risk there, for me, maybe because I'm in the law business, it's the courts. I'm worried about not Trump as a candidate, but the conditions that produced him and that produced some of the support for Sanders, which seemed to make it easier, because politically attractive, to delegitimize the one branch of government that's not well situated to stick up for itself. And I wonder if you share that concern.
No, I do. And Trevor, one of the most worrying things about the Trump phenomenon to me is this attack on really the moral or the fibers that we are as a society. When he said the other week that if he loses, it'll be because the election was rigged. That goes to your same point. If he somehow represents forces in our society that undermine the legitimacy of our judiciary, we are in big trouble.
Okay,
big trouble. I couldn't
but
agree more.
Eric, bringing in Steve Bannon.
Jane, you said I was not here to defend Trump,
I'm asking for your considered opinion given the base of experience that you have. Why do you bring in a man who is called Republican leaders, the C word, who is attacked, who's been a flamethrower? Okay, you.
I get it.
I didn't want to get personal.
Right.
But he has a scorched earth, I don't even want to call it journalism policy. Why do you bring in somebody like that if you're trying to signal that you're promoting unity among Republicans? Let's start with Republicans.
No, Jane, I agree. You know I agree with that. I agree. This is unfathomable to me, the direction that it's heading. But what I guess I'm here to say today is, it's frontal on my side right now with Trump. We know what we're in store for and what has to be done to provide the counterweights. Trevor talked about the courts. We have a system of check and balances in our Constitution. But I guess what I'm here to say is, let's stop to think for a minute the journey that Hillary Clinton has been on because of what's going on in her party and Hakeem's party on the Sanders side of things.
Okay.
And that's a really important question, I think, for this crowd in particular.
Okay, let's get Hakeem's reaction.
Yeah, no, I do think it's an important issue that we should unpack. First, I was a strong Hillary Clinton supporter during the primary, and obviously continue to be. My motto for the year has been, may the best woman win. But I think that there are legitimate comparisons to the Sanders phenomenon and the Trump phenomenon as it relates to the issue of certain institutions and a grave distrust in government and government not working for the people in a variety of different ways, and there being disaffected anger that exists amongst some of the Sanders supporters and disaffected anger that exists amongst some of the Trump supporters. But I think, to be fair to Bernie Sanders, I can't find a trace of xenophobia, a trace of racism, a trace of necessarily dismissing people based on what they look like or the religion that they practice or the journeys that they've traveled, in the same way that some aspects of the Trump phenomenon have appealed to bad actors in society. And so I think I'd be hesitant to make the blanket comparison, and I don't think that Eric has been doing that, because I do think that there are legitimate issues that Bernie Sanders has raised. Certainly when it comes to the cost of a higher education and the sticker shock that many middle-class American families experience, particularly when they look at a private college education, and the fact that student loan debt right now in this country is in excess of $1.3 trillion, which is a weight around the neck of younger Americans in terms of their ability to start a family, be entrepreneurial, purchase a home, the things that have been part of the classic American dream. And so there were a lot of legitimate issues that Bernie Sanders was tapping into to excite particularly younger Americans. There are areas of concern in terms of the hard right, hard left, I should say, who I've also clashed with the hard right, but hard left who I've clashed with on a variety of different issues who were core Bernie Sanders supporters. But I don't want to dismiss the legitimacy of many of the issues that he raised during this campaign.
Okay, I think we have time for one more, I'm sorry, quick question, and then we're going to have to do wrap-up statements. It's going to be you.
So here's a bipartisan challenge. I think both congressmen have diagnosed one of the root causes of these extreme Trump and Sanders phenomena as economic uncertainty and what you call the loss of good American jobs. Why don't we stem the problem at the base and make all American jobs good jobs by having a living minimum wage?
You're talking about raising the minimum wage, a living wage, a work. What do you think?
Listen, there is no question that we want to see wages go up. My question back to you is, are we best doing that when we tell businesses they must? They must. And again, you agree with that. I just want to go back for a second and just remind us of the country that we live in and the extent to which we believe the government should be telling the private sector what to do. I mean, this is the discussion, the legitimate discussion we should be having in this country.
But that's not what people are talking about. What are people talking about?
Right.
I mean, do you not think that's detrimental to this in terms of the way the office of the presidency has been treated?
100%. And I agree. Those issues that Hakeem discussed about what Bernie is raising, similarly, when Trump goes and uses the vulgarity and all the things that spew from him, the issues underlying that are very similar. So just set the man aside for a second. There is real economic dislocation. There's real questions about physical security when these terrorist incidents occur. So, I mean, we are unfortunately now not talking about the issue of living wage versus how do you get the private markets going again so you can see wages going up. This is the issue here, and it's unfortunate. I think all of us as Americans want to see the kind of substantive debate that ensues and should be, but it goes back to we've got to stop, and Bernie actually did this and continues to do it, undermine the institutions of our country in a way that I don't think portends well for any of us.
Okay, listening to you, I have a couple of, because we're getting toward closing time here, a couple of quick questions. Eric, you had your own brush with populism and what that could do, and it sent a seismic shock through the establishment. Listening to you today, it almost sounds like you might jump back in at some point.
You know, Jane, where's my wife? Because I'm
Diana's someplace.
Right. It would. You know, I'm good. You know, I'm good.
Are you really happy to be sitting this one out?
I would say somebody calls me weekly. I told Oscar Schaefer this last night. Calls me weekly and reminds me how I'm the luckiest SOB alive. You may not have asked for it. But no, again, listen, obviously I'm very passionate about our country, about my party, its role in our country. And I'll just say, you never say never, but I'm good right now.
Okay. All right, I want to ask you, Hakeem, first of all, I mean, do you think it's a done deal? You stood up at the Democratic Convention and called this election a choice between a commander-in-chief and a bankrupter-in-chief, a secretary of state and a secretary of hate. You really got the crowd going. Why should anyone believe at this point, given this unprecedented race, given the volatility, given the tumult, why should anyone believe that this is already a done deal for Hillary Clinton?
I don't think it's a done deal, and I think, and Peter raised this point, that we have to take this election seriously because there is an intensity amongst many of Donald Trump's supporters where I'm convinced they will go to the polls on Election Day. They are going to support his candidacy no matter what the circumstances are in terms of what unfolds between today and November 8th when Americans will cast their votes. And so on the Democratic side, I think, and all reasonable Hillary Clinton supporters are going to have to approach the election with that same degree of intensity. And one of the reasons is that, and this point was raised earlier, that executive elections tend in many ways to be a reaction to the prior or the current office holder. And in other words, that the electorate in America went with Barack Obama. In some ways, he had great appeal because he was a change candidate, very different than what George W. Bush represented in a wide variety of ways. In New York City, and many of the people here are from New York City, Bill de Blasio was sort of a reaction to 12 years of Michael Bloomberg. In Newark, you had Cory Booker for about 8 years. Ras Baraka, who was an activist, was sort of a reaction amongst the Newark electorate to Cory Booker and his style of governance. I mean, you can go executive election after executive election. And so obviously, Donald Trump, in a lot of ways, represents a very different phenomenon than anyone who has ever held office. And certainly at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And that fact alone, I think, can't be discounted in terms of the desire. This is a change election. Very rare that Democrats win 3 consecutive elections after a 2-term Democratic presidency. And I think for that reason alone, we have to be concerned and we have to be vigilant on the Democratic side.
Okay, looking down the road, Eric, do you think the Republican Party, and the way they did an autopsy last time around and looked at things they have to do to improve and bring people into the tent, if Hillary Clinton does prevail, what do you think we're going to see with the Republican Party?
I think we're already seeing it, because I know some of the conversations that I've been in and are ensuing in Washington and elsewhere reflect, I think, what happened in the Democratic Party, perhaps after McGovern, perhaps mid-1980s leading up to Bill Clinton's election, because if you recall back then, the Democratic Leadership Council was created. And it was created by Al Frome, and ultimately was the vehicle through which Bill Clinton was elected in '92. And it was a time in Hakeem's party's history, in the Democratic Party's history, where they sort of began to examine the orthodoxy that the party had been adherent to. And I think that the same will have to develop in my party, because a lot of people in the press will say, well, it's really about Trumpism versus the Tea Party, or it's Donald Trump versus what Ted Cruz is about or what Paul Ryan is about. And to me, there's actually a lot of nuance that's not being noticed by the press, because the party has run on a platform much different, frankly, than what Donald Trump is running on for the last 8-10 years. I mean, it has been a party, mine has been, that's very dedicated to fiscal discipline, very dedicated to trying to get the budget deficit under control. Hakeem noted that the Freedom Caucus has become a purist vehicle. They won't do anything if it's not to retire the debt, period. No function of government should occur, other than the national defense perhaps, and maybe some few others, without our erasing the debt first. And again, I think it will have to go through some of this questions on national security, America's role in the world. My party's not so monolithic on that anymore.
What about losing, it's been said that you're losing a whole generation of voters. That right now the stats are such that under 35s, I mean, you don't find a lot of 18-year-olds who want to be Republicans anymore.
Right. I mean, listen, there are issues that, that my kids and all of yours are concerned about that perhaps my party's not speaking to. Okay. The question of the diversity in this country, growing diversity, Hakeem's district, I didn't realize the most diverse in the country. My party's not doing so right now with Donald Trump as the head of it. So again, what do we do about that? How do we go forward? Obviously, part of the reason why I lost was the issue of immigration. I really did feel we ought to go at least try and move incrementally towards reform. Let's start with the kids. My goodness, that they're here, being brought here by parents when they were when they were minors. So let's at least go ahead and allow them the citizenship. They don't know anywhere else is home for the most part. So
I'm going to have to cut you off. I think we have about 30 seconds left. Hakeem, I'm going to ask you to wrap this up in 30 seconds. What's your best hope? Well, aside the obvious for you, for this that comes out beyond this election, what is it?
Well, that the shock to the system will be so dramatic that Democrats and Republicans will come to Washington in January looking to govern and to find common ground, whether that's on dealing with mass incarceration, where there's a great bipartisan effort that's underway, infrastructure, tax reform, that there are areas where Democrats and Republicans can agree, and hopefully the notion of the dramatic nature of this election is such that we abandon the perpetual campaign and take some time out to govern on behalf of the American people.
Okay, great last statement. I want to thank our fabulous guests. And go out and go buy Eric's book. We want to thank all of you. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of you. Oh, they want you to run for mayor, Hakeem. He doesn't want to run for mayor. You don't want to run for mayor. Oh, now he's saying never say never. Okay, anyway, have a great day. Thank you all very much.